Hi, this is Eric Battersby with Change Your World Films again. I want to take a moment just to share my first experience in meeting someone with frontotemporal dementia, a truly sinister dementia that you'll hear me refer to for the most part going forward simply as FTD for short. I know I've mentioned this previously, but it's important to repeat it here just in case you haven't heard this before. There are several reasons why FTD is so sinister, but two of the worst ones are: number one, it can affect people when they're much, much younger than you'd expect. And number two, it's absolutely devastating. The life expectancy after diagnosis is short, regardless of what age the person is at the time. And perhaps even worse than the life expectancy itself, this disease in most facets essentially takes your loved one away from you right before your very eyes, even though that person may still live for months or even years after this occurs. Now, my first experience with FTD actually happened when my girlfriend at the time, Katie Moriarty, had her father diagnosed with this dementia shortly before she and I started dating. Katie and her family are featured prominently in the film, so this is really all part of the story we're telling here. Although Katie and I haven't been together for years, we had an absolutely wonderful, super close relationship for the few years we were together, and it was completely heartbreaking during this time to see what was happening to her father, Gene. If you can imagine this, before I met Gene, Katie had to try to figure out a way to accurately communicate to me what was going on with him. And to be completely honest, she had no chance to truly accomplish that, because if you aren't already aware of what FTD is, of what FTD does, it's pretty much impossible to be prepared for actually meeting someone with it. And I think the younger the person is at the time, the more difficult that obstacle is. And what I mean by the younger person, I'm referring to the person with FTD. The younger the person with FTD is, the more difficult the obstacle is for the person meeting them. In this case, it was me readying for that moment of meeting the love of my life's father, which of course can already be a little nerve-wracking. I don't care how old you are at the time, that tends to be an intense moment as a guy, and this added just so many layers to it. Then when I did finally meet Gene, I'll never forget that day being in the kitchen at Katie's parents' house, because at first it's confusing. It's really hard to understand what's happening with the affected person. And then once it starts to sink in, you just feel, really feel the devastation. It's right there front and center, and you realize that this family, Katie, her sister Molly, and her mom Carol in particular, were just quietly holding on and fighting with everything they had. And meanwhile, I went through the sad revelation that on my side, I just really wasn't ever going to get to meet Katie's father after all. I'd heard so many great things about him, and I wanted to see that person. I wanted to see the great aspects of his relationship with Katie, and I wanted to learn more about Katie even from him. I just wanted to learn and experience so much more than I was ever going to get the chance to do, because the simple fact of the matter was, FTD had, for the most part, already taken Gene away from everyone, even though he was still physically present, even though he was sitting right across from me at the kitchen table. So essentially there was a mourning taking place. It felt like loss because I could sit right next to Katie's dad, we could share a meal, but the hope of having a normal, meaningful interaction with Gene was just gone. And even though I was absolutely loving life so much at the time, because in part of how great Katie and I were together, there was also this underlying layer of sadness, because I spent a lot of time with Katie and her family over those years, and the weight of FTD on Gene and on all of them was just ever present. And it really hurts when you want more than anything to just help the people you love in that situation, and there is nothing you can do except offer support. That's it. FTD takes no prisoners. But I will not leave you on that note, because there's one final short but super important story here. It was either through her graduate work or kind of a self-help organization Katie was involved with at the time. I don't remember which, but Katie needed to come up with a passion project she could work on for a while. It was pretty close to the beginning of our relationship, and we were both brainstorming on it together for a while. And at the time, I was deep into production for my first film, Pyrite, over at Hollywood 27 Productions. And it just came to me out of the blue one day while we were talking. So I said, hey, why don't you do a documentary on your dad and we can work on it together? And Katie's eyes lit up like you wouldn't believe. It wasn't like one light bulb popped on, but like 1,000 light bulbs popped on all at once. And for me, that moment was basically the polar opposite of the super sad moment when I met her father, Gene, and started to realize what FTD really was. Because now instead of that feeling, there was this brief moment of triumph. And it was simply, hey, we know there's no easy cure for FTD right now, but what can help is if we try to prepare families and friends and coworkers and any other loved ones for this devastation that FTD is going to lay down before them. We can create something that will always be there for these folks. So that's the two things here, really. My first experience meeting someone with FTD, and then the actual genesis of this entire project, which, by the way, Katie completely ran with on the front end. Now, on the back end here with Change the World Films, the last thing I'll say here is that we're giving this project the full Change the World Films treatment. And that means this isn't going to just be a movie. The FTD documentary website will grow into a permanent resource and a permanent community that will live on well past the final work we're doing here on the film. And that's a huge deal to me. I don't ever want us to just make a movie. We always are working on something bigger than that. So that's some of my personal insight into our FTD documentary. I hope it inspires you to support the project however you can, whether that's donating money or time or even just spreading the word as far and wide as possible. Thanks for watching.